Hello everyone! In this episode of Warhammer Total War Unit Analysis, I'll be looking at Crypt Ghouls. Ever hungry for the flesh of the living, these cannibals come equipped with little more than the femurs of their victims with nails rammed through them. But nonetheless, they are quite dangerous. They can tear apart light infantry very quickly, acting as cheap shock troops seated among the undead hordes. Compared to many other vampire count infantry, Crypt Ghouls have very high offensive stats. Their melee attack is pretty good, they have a great charge bonus for an infantry unit, and their weapon damage is great, ensuring they'll cause mayhem both on the charge and shortly afterwards. Their movement speed is also very high for an infantry unit, and they'll often outpace many other types of infantry, meaning they're also good at flanking enemy positions or hunting down routing units. They also apply poison with all their attacks, weakening the units they fight, meaning those units won't be able to inflict as many casualties on the Crypt Ghouls or on any other unit that those units might be fighting, and will be slowed down significantly, making it even easier for the Crypt Ghouls to hunt down routing enemies that they already hit. And of course, like all vampire count units, Crypt Ghouls benefit from being undead, having access to fear and never routing, just crumbling. However, on the contrast, Crypt Ghouls are quite fragile. Compared to skeleton warriors, they have far less health, far less soldiers, practically no armor, and don't carry shields. When Crypt Ghouls get shot at or take charges from heavy hitters, they'll often lose soldiers in spades. Get it, spades? To make matters worse, Crypt Ghouls also suffer from their attacks dealing only very little armor-piercing damage, which means Crypt Ghouls struggle to deal with many factions' elite units, and are very hard to use effectively against dwarven forces, who are naturally very heavily armored. Because of this, you can consider them budget shock troopers who pay for their low cost in gold with some glaring weaknesses. There's two ways to use Crypt Ghouls to the best of their ability. The first is to use one or two groups of Crypt Ghouls to flank the enemy's defensive line and have them charge into some squishy, poorly armored unit. Or if such a target is not available, using them to charge an armored unit in the back to cause a morale shock and apply poison. Because of their great movement speed and low cost, Crypt Ghouls work well in this respect for those armies that have invested heavily in other areas and have very little gold to spend on proper flanking units. Otherwise, Crypt Ghouls also do well if seated amongst your army, usually behind your skeletons or zombies. While Crypt Ghouls cannot effectively charge through friendly units or infantry, unlike monstrous infantry, every time a Crypt Ghoul squeezes through the ranks to hit an enemy unit, that whole enemy unit will get poisoned. Add to that the fact that individual Crypt Ghouls have enough weapon damage to cause a lot of hurt, and will both be weakening the enemy front line and forcing the enemy front line to fight high damage Crypt Ghouls. In the campaign, Crypt Ghouls can be used as an upgrade over skeleton warriors, but this is not recommended, as vampire counts often end up going to war with the dwarves to the east and south. In such a situation, Crypt Ghouls struggle to make up for their cost, as many basic dwarven units have so much armor that a great deal of the Crypt Ghoul's strength will be wasted. That being said, Crypt Ghouls are wonderful if used as early game shock troops. Have skeletons hold the line, then use Crypt Ghouls as a flanking force. They turn those early game meat grinders the vampire counts have to slog through into short, brutal engagements. Late game, Crypt Ghouls get zoned out hard, as highly armored units become more prevalent and you get access to other superior damage dealers. In the multiplayer, Crypt Ghouls are used for two things: their high damage against poorly armored infantry and their sheer speed. While Crypt Ghouls can't outrun cavalry, and in fact should be very careful about being trampled by those, their high movement speed nonetheless makes them well suited for flanking maneuvers or for intercepting enemy units that are trying to do the same. Against poorly armored infantry, Crypt Ghouls tend to do very well due to their high damage and good leadership, which makes them especially effective against beastmen or orcs, whose armies tend to consist primarily of mostly poorly armored units. However, under no circumstances should Crypt Ghouls be used as the core of your army. While this can be tempting due to their apparent superiority over skeletons, the problems start if your opponent brought out a few missile units or a heavily armored front line. Crypt Ghouls take massive casualties from arrows and bullets, due to their lack of armor or shields, and deal only marginally better damage against heavily armored units than regular skeletons do. If you do take some Crypt Ghouls, treat them as light infantry with big weapons and use them accordingly. There's also a unit of renown of Crypt Ghouls known as the Feasters in the Dusk. These are more aggressively orientated Crypt Ghouls who get Vanguard deployment and the Stalk special rule. This means that they're invisible until detected and can deploy in a very wide range on the map before the battle starts. If you weren't planning on taking that many Crypt Ghouls to begin with, and your main concern was having a cheap unit to flank the enemy's forces with, these guys are a pretty good choice, as they're not terribly expensive but will very quickly kill archers or siege weapon crews. Just make sure they don't get spotted before they're in charge range, as the vampire counts lack other units with stalk and thus cannot field units that can directly support the Feasters in the Dusk. So, in summary, Crypt Ghouls are hard-hitting, apply poison to weaken enemy units, are fast for infantry, and they're fairly cheap for shock troops. However, they're very fragile and as a result can't beat most units of their cost, and they lose most of their damage against heavily armored units. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you all in the next episode of this guide.